Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So I've played the Genshin TCG for 3 days now, and at least spent 12 plus hours on the card game. And after spending like a decent amount of time learning the mechanics, basics, deck building, fighting NPCs, playing against real life players, I think it's okay now for me to talk about some of my first impressions, both good and bad. So to start off, I think it's obvious to most of you who played the card game that it definitely counts as a success for MiHoYo. Like I recognize that that's going to be a contentious thing to say. Now that people are like fighting over this end game versus casual content shit. But by success, I just mean that the card game is not. It doesn't feel boring to me. I'm actually having fun playing the game. I see most of the people playing the game online. They look like they're having fun. So all I'm saying is that it looks like people are having fun playing the game, and that counts as a success for a card game. That's all. But I think it's also worth mentioning that there are definitely reasons outside the game itself why people are having fun with it. Like, obviously, it's tied to a very popular intellectual property, Genshin Impact. A lot of the enjoyment I derive from the game is admittedly just being able to see Genshin characters in card form. Like, this isn't anything new or unique to Genshin. A lot of other online card games do this as well. Marvel Snap, Runeterra, Hearthstone. So before that, physical card games like Pokemon also did the same thing. And these are all just card games I've played in the past because of their IPs. And eventually I dropped them because gameplay or progression became too unbearable for me to keep playing. At the end of the day, I had fun with these games initially because of their IPs. And I'm not trying to imply that the same thing will happen with Genshin TCG, but I definitely am skeptical that the mechanics alone would be able to carry the game outside of Genshin. The mechanics not being balanced or complex enough isn't actually that big of a deal for the card game because the goal, as Miho has stated many times in the past, is to keep Genshin a casual game, and this extends the card game as well. I feel like online card games are just trending towards more casual playstyle, anyways. For example, Marvel Snap is probably the most recent example. Very quick games, a lot of RNG, more variety in the kind of dailies than Hearthstone and Runeterra in how you can progress with your, daily activities so that you can get more cards. But I still dropped Marvel Snap eventually because I didn't like the kind of progression they offered, where cards were essentially hidden behind level ups, and you couldn't really see what kind of cards you were getting. So basically, it felt like the longer I played, the less I was getting. The intervals between how long you would get a card would increase every time you leveled up. And eventually, I just felt like it wasn't worth playing anymore because you couldn't see what new card you were getting. Um, yeah, and the cards are basically the characters, right? The Marvel characters. And I only played Marvel Snap initially because I wanted to see my favorite Marvel characters on the cards. And if I couldn't like see what cards I was getting and they were getting more and more infrequent, then I just stopped playing eventually because my main motivation for playing the game was gone. So while I've begun to see a large time gating issue with the Genshin TCG as well, one benefit it does have over Marvel Snap is that it does allow you to invite any character you want, which basically in game terms means that you can just get their cards. So, with the exception of special monster cards that are locked behind challenges that you can do at each player level, like Rodeo of Lock, Magu Kenki, Mirror Maiden, all the available cards or characters can be bought with the in game currency. The in game currency and the progression are currently my biggest issues with the game. It's not like a deal breaker as of yet, but it is something I'm becoming more aware of the more I play. So, both cards and dynamic skins, which is essentially the in game term for animated card skins, or just like animated cards, cost lucky coins, which is the in game currency. This was known as early as the 3.3 livestream when I called this out as a potential problem, because you're essentially forced to choose between getting more cards or making them look good. You can get lucky coins by playing against NPCs in the open world, getting achievements, leveling up, but mostly you'll be depending on weekly guest challenges eventually. And aside from weekly challenges, none of the other sources of lucky coins are renewable, so they are a finite resource. Once you've fought every NPC in the open world, gotten all of the achievements, reached level 10, which is the max level cap, you can never get those rewards again. There's always the possibility that we'll get more NPCs and achievements later on because NPCs are separated by region. So Mondstadt, Liyue, Sumeru, Inazuma, they all have their own NPCs. So it makes sense to me that once we get another region expansion like Fontaine or Natland, we'll also get challengeable NPCs for those regions. However, all those NPCs are locked behind player levels, and player experience is also obtained by playing against NPCs and weekly challenges. So the amount of experience that you need to level up at this point seems to be finely tuned so that you're always going to be on the cusp of leveling up just before you run out of sources for experience. This exciting factor again seems to be weekly challenges, which are not all available at once, but arrive throughout the week. So you'll have to log in multiple times during the week to get all their rewards. There are 4 weekly challenges, each of which currently give 300 coins as rewards for a total of 1200 coins per week. You can unlock harder challenges as you level up for greater rewards. I have not reached that point yet, but knowing MiHoYo, this will probably only increase the amount of coins by 100 per challenge if we're being generous. So, assuming that's the case, it will take at least 2 to 3 weeks to earn one dynamics character skin, which costs 4,000 coins. But you also get dynamic skins and cards by playing against NPCs, leveling up, and achievements, and all that usual stuff. But again, none of those are renewable. So eventually, you'll have to depend on the meager amount of coins you receive from weeklies to get those skins and cards. It's not the worst system I've ever seen in an online card game. It might even be generous, like relative to other online card games, because it's completely free to play. There's no pay to win currency for the card game, so you can't even buy stuff if you wanted to with real money. But there definitely is time gating, and early comments I read about how easy it will be to obtain everything, probably because they read misleading leaks, are definitely premature at this point and probably completely wrong. In fact, because there is no pay to win currency for the card game, it's likely or even it's possible or even likely that you will simply never have everything being sold in the card shop. There are already rumors that the next patch will be adding additional cards, so even with the amount of freebies you get just by playing the game and saving your coins, it's possible that as a collector, if you're into like just having everything in the card game, you're never going to reach that stage because every time you get close to having everything, there's going to be more content that they release in the next patch. I'm not saying that this is a bad or a good thing, it's just something that I've noticed. I mentioned progression because that's frankly the main reason why I stopped playing these previous online card games. I stopped playing Marvel Snap because I wanted the characters I wanted and they wouldn't give me those characters. And I didn't want to go through this whole process of keeping leveling up, even though the level up intervals kept getting longer and longer until I really didn't have any motivation to keep playing the game. Hearthstone as well, I had to keep playing PvP every single day to progress, and the dailies were annoying as fuck. Runeterra not so much. I really enjoyed Runeterra, but it was just too much game time, and too much like it just felt like it was taking up too much mental power. It was not a casual game, so eventually I stopped playing that. But aside from that, I think miHoYo has done a pretty good job of making a Genshin card game, right? I really enjoyed how they translated the elemental reactions and burst mechanics and skill mechanics for the characters into combat, like card game mechanics. It kind of reminds me of a Kickstarter project because those tend to adhere pretty closely to the source material. So I thought that was pretty interesting how miHoYo basically did what a Kickstarter project did, but better. The meta narrative about the card game in the world of Genshin itself is just okay. Like, personally, I thought the introduction quest was kind of forgettable. It was serviceable. It got me to the main hub. It got me to play card games. That's all it really needed to do. Diona sounded kind of weird in the. It didn't sound like Diona for some reason in the tutorial, but whatever. That's a small issue. Maybe it wasn't the same voice actor. Maybe it's because Diona wasn't talking about fucking wine and his drunk dad or something. Maybe that was the problem. So going around interacting with the NPCs felt really nostalgic to me because back in the day, I played this Game Boy Advance game about Yu-Gi-Oh! And I would do the exact same things as I did now in Genshin, where I'd go around talking to these like 3 pixel NPCs and get them to duel me, and I would do the exact same things as I do now in Genshin. So it's kind of like a trip down memory lane playing this game in the world of Genshin. Not a lot of card games do that nowadays, I think. Like they don't try to give you this overworld with NPCs that have their own unique decks. It's more of just the PvP things now. I think Genshin takes a step back. It takes a in fact this entire Genshin card game, like the meta narrative around it as far as the like light novel that Yai is supposed to have written or published is entirely ripped from Yu-Gi-Oh! And I don't think it's a coincidence that they released the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, the Genshin card game, in the region where half the landmass is based off of Egyptian culture. So they have that going for it. It's obviously tied together. I was a bit confused at first with the NPC challenges though, because the adventure challenges I thought were going to be me dueling the NPCs, but it turns out it's more like the NPCs behaving as cards on my side while I dueled like Kilicho cards. I realized that eventually that was basically like LARPing. Like we were doing this LARPing RPG adventure, and then there was another option where we could duel them. So that was the real duel, and the adventure challenge was just me getting the NPC card. So once I figured that out, it made a bit more consistency in my mind. I guess overall, everything about the card game as it's set up in the world of Genshin itself is fine. If you're really, really into lore consistency, I guess it could be a bit weird that you're inviting people from all over Teyvat for duels, or that they're using card art based on living people in the world of Teyvat. But like it was always apparent to me that this was going to be the case, and whatever reason they make up in the world of Genshin is just going to be that it's just an excuse for that setup to exist. We're not going to get card art for a bunch of characters that we don't know anything about based on like I guess it would be cool because it would be based on legends of Genshin Impact, but I suspect that some of these legends are going to be playable later on, and they want to save that for later content. And it's just much easier to create artwork that is already in the game or based on real like already existing art. So it's just something that is obvious, and you just have to suspend your imagination, suspend your suspension of disbelief or something. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter to me what the reason is. One small thing I would change though about the unit interface is that I feel like this is a small oversight, which is that you cannot equip your deck. Like you literally cannot use a hotkey to bring up your deck. This is the one complaint I have about the setup for the open world portion of this game, which is that you literally need to go into your inventory and then click your deck and then open your deck to edit your cards in your decks, and that's so fucking annoying. It should just be equipable, and then I should be able to press Z, and then that brings up my deck, and then I can do stuff with it. But I can't do that. You literally have to go into your inventory and click it manually. That's super annoying. Mihoyo, go change it. As far as the game itself, I still don't feel like I have a good enough grasp of the mechanics to say much about it or form any hard opinions. Like sometimes I still forget what each elemental reaction does and get surprised by unforeseen circumstances in game. So I'm not anywhere near an expert on this stuff. Don't ask me about that. But I have heard some complaints about there being too much RNG because of the dice system, and I'm not inherently against the idea of dices being used as resources for card actions. And obviously, MiHoYo is not going to change any of this now that the game is released. They don't make fundamental changes to the game systems they release, they just add more stuff on top. They have said that they'll keep an eye on the balance in a previous website tutorial on the game mechanics. So maybe they'll change the cost of this card or change the damage of that ability. But in terms of fundamental changes, there's not going to be anything in that way whatsoever. And as a result of that system, dice manipulating cards like Paimon, like Jade Chamber, the other variation of Paimon, these cards are going to be must-haves or at least staples in practically every single deck, maybe every single deck. And that is going to result in less deck variety unless some major unless like they up the card of the Paimon card to like 4 or 5, and maybe even then it would still be worth it. So I don't know. I don't know. They could, like, one of my knee jerk reactions and suggestions to this is to mitigate this problem by restricting concurrently on field support cards to just one per copy. So you can't have two Paimons and two Jade Chambers on the field at the same time. You can only have one. So that is something they can do. They could also like increase the cost of cards, as I said again, or decrease the cost of certain cards that are considered too weak. But I feel like at this point, these suggestions risk making the game more restrictive and less fun to play in the meta that has not settled down yet. Like we have not had any real tournaments that I've seen, and most people, like absolutely everyone, does not have all the cards yet. We don't know what the full like utility of the entire roster of characters is, or what all the cards do. Maybe somebody has already gamed this out, but at this point, I think it's still too soon to say. And that's why I'm not really going to suggest anything in terms of like art opinions or art suggestions. These are just some things I've thought of. Like you could up the cost of J Chamber. It seems way too good to me, at least in mono electro decks, where you can just spam two J Chambers, have two Paimons, and then you can keep doing everything you want to do and switch between this character without going into like without switching to their turn because of this card of Catherine, and because all your characters use the same element, you can just keep on spamming that. So that seems a bit too good to me. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I'm not. It's just too soon to tell. Anyways, those are my first impressions of the Genshin TCG after 3 days and 12 plus hours of playing it. I'm still having a lot of fun, to be honest, but the issue of time gating is something that is popping up now that I'm experiencing. And even though there's no pay to win, it doesn't feel good to have to wait a day or two to keep progressing. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. I hope you guys enjoy the card game as well. And I'll see you probably in game maybe, unless I face a bot again. That is also something that I've noticed, which is that sometimes there will be bots in the matchmaking, which you're supposed to be able to fight against real life people, but it's very obvious that there are some bots. Maybe they're bots that were put in by MiHoYo. Maybe they're just normal bots that like actual people made. Who knows? So that's a bit that's a bit awkward. And hopefully I don't see any more bots in the matchmaking again. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out. See you guys later.